The 200K plus couple that cannot afford a home in LA. So this comes from Yahoo Finance and Fortune magazine. Let me go ahead and read through it a bit. A professional couple who makes over $200,000 combined says it's hilarious to think they could afford a home in Los Angeles. All right. Stan, oh boy, Oklabidja and his partner live in a one-bedroom condo in Los Angeles' Little Tokyo. And he realizes he's lucky. We are in the top percent of incomes between what I make and what she makes, he told Fortune, adding that their earnings amount to around $225,000 per year. But they're renting, and he doesn't see that ever changing. With housing costs being what they are, just the idea of us ever owning a home is absolutely like it's funny. It's like we might as well own a spaceship. Wow, well, that's extreme. Each of them makes a six-figure salary, he says, with Oklabidja, 40, being a visiting assistant professor of public policy at UC Riverside, and his partner, 35, working in the digital advertising industry. They pay $2,400 a month in rent, and he tweeted late last month that the idea that we could ever own a home here is hilarious. If someone who makes six figures and together with his partner makes more than $200,000 feels as though they can't afford a home in Los Angeles, how can we expect it to be affordable for anyone making less than that? Oklabidja is right when he says he's in the top range of salary earners. As of 2021, the median household income in the city of LA was $69,778 per the Census Bureau. Those in the 95th percentile of household incomes in the city make nearly $243,000, and those in the 80th percentile make $115,000, according to Statistical Atlas. Meanwhile, the average Los Angeles home value is $891,820 per Zillow, more than double the average U.S. home value. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development defines affordable housing as, quote, as housing on which the occupant is paying no more than 30% of gross income for housing costs, including utilities. Oklabidja and his partner aren't the only high earners that are still renting instead of owning. As a professor of public policy, Oklabidja's research tends to focus on housing policy. And before this role, he was the research director for California YIMBY, a pro-development, yes in my backyard advocacy organization, which says it's working to pass legislation to end California's housing shortage by empowering and growing the YIMBY movement. Oklabidja says that despite earning more and more advancing in his career, he's come to eventually realize that he's not hitting the milestones that previous generations did, like owning a home. The inability of millennials to enter into the home ownership market in ways that previous generations have has always been sort of described as some sort of like the inherited failing of young people, rather than looking at these insane structural barriers that are put in place, Oklabidja says. Those barriers, he suggests, are making incumbent homeowners far richer while eviscerating, I'll have to look that one up, an entire generation of people, his generation, along with communities of color and lower income communities that have historically faced those same barriers. Oklabidja's message for Gen Z, get ready, he said with a laugh. There was a time where Los Angeles built to accommodate new demand, with just a glut of building, as Oklabidja referred to it, adding that the same could be said for cities across the nation. More than 40 million housing units were built in the United States during the 30-year period following the end of the World War II. And in California alone, approximately 6 million housing units were constructed during the same period, according to a post-war analysis by the California Department of Transportation. But that began to end in the 70s and into the 80s with measures like Proposition U, passed in 86, that had a major impact by cutting half the floor area ratio, the lot size of a property, and the amount of development permitted for most commercially zoned land. There was a massive downzoning of Los Angeles, so it literally became illegal to build multifamily. It became illegal to build anything other than single-family homes on large lots. That changed the game for higher density housing and triggered a scarcity crisis that manifested in higher prices. We have a desire to own something. It doesn't need to be a detached single-family home, but it's just been illegal in Los Angeles and still remains illegal in Los Angeles, in most of the city, to construct these types, Oklabidja says. I mean, if you look at the west side of Los Angeles, like nothing has changed there in 40 years. He's not the only he's not the first or last person to blame the nation's housing crisis, largely due to its shortage of homes, which sends prices up on the inability to build. For instance, economics writer Noah Smith recently wrote that America's inability to build things, housing for one, is often stalled because of permitting and developing rules, worsened by NIMBYs or not in my backyard anti-development residents, and is crippling the country as a result. Oklabija, taking this step further, called it a refusal to build. Oklabija argues that housing policy is local policy because land use policy is typically set by elected officials locally. Those local elected officials, they don't win re-election by doing the right thing, but rather by what will get them votes. That often means catering to NIMBYs, who typically argue that higher density and new development will negatively affect their quality of life or the surrounding environment and bring their property values down. NIMBYism is an extremely potent force, Oklabija says, and unfortunately, American political institutions are set up such that the best way to stay in office for a local elected official is to cave into the NIMBYs, Oklabija says. We don't have to have a housing crisis. We are choosing to have a housing crisis. According to LA County, the region needs to add nearly 500,000 affordable homes to meet current demand, just for lower income renter households. We've seen how this has played out in the unhoused population. As of last year, 69,144 people were experiencing homelessness in LA County, while Governor Gavin Newsom is expected to address the housing shortage in a variety of ways, including announcing a plan to allocate $30 million, wow, that's nothing, to build small homes across the state, and filing a lawsuit against Huntington Beach's ban on accessory dwelling units, to mention a few. The crisis is ongoing. All right, almost done. Oklabija knows that he and his partner have options in terms of owning a home. They may not be ideal options, but he realizes they're in a better position than most, and that's why he questions what it's like for those with less means financially. Nonetheless, Oklabija says that even if he decided to buy that $600,000 one bedroom with 1,000 HOA every month, in a sort of extreme hypothetical situation that he gave Fortune, the down payment would still be an issue aside from monthly costs. Where are we going to come up with this down payment? Even with the money that we make, it's impossible to come up with 20%, Oklabija says. People don't just have $100,000 in cash, just kind of kicking it. Every time he and his partner opened up Zillow or even looked at alerts to see if they can make the move into home ownership, Oklabija says it just isn't something that feels like a reality for them. He gave the analogy of a treadmill, claiming that it feels they're sprinting just to stay in place. Later this year, Oklabija is moving to New Orleans for a professorship at Tulane, a move that he said Los Angeles' market, in part, prompted him to make. All right. Off you go, Dan.
Boy, there's so much in this article, man. Well, I'm going to try to stay positive, but
I said hopeful reality. So yeah.
Well, with a lack of more details, and I have to make assumptions because I can only go by the info they gave.
Right.
This guy is I'm sorry, he's a snowflake, man. You make over $200K, and you pay $30K a year in rent.
Right.
You can't save $100K?
Right.
What are you doing? Seriously, what are you doing?
Well, when I saw that 2,400 number, I was like, okay, good. He's keeping his rent as low as he can.
Totally. Yes.
If you use the old equation of 30% should go to housing, he's got room there, like you said, to save.
He has room at 30%, but the mortgage numbers have been at 50% for 2 decades.
Right.
And those who took that leap have been very successful and done very well and have created a lot of stability, and a lot of them pay a lot less than $2,400 a month in a mortgage unless they've refinanced. But he hasn't. So he has the means to save well over $100K with the info we have.
Right.
He chooses
not to. It won't happen
to.
Overnight. Right, it won't happen overnight.
It could happen overnight. His numbers look really obvious. Okay?
Yeah.
It could happen overnight. But there are some things I definitely agree with in him. I'm not saying the cost of housing is high. It's certainly high. The move on inflation that's going on now is hard, but Ironically, inflation stabilizes higher housing prices, which it's done historically. So that's going to bring some stability. But the article is 100% correct about NIMBYism. And
Yep.
I had never heard the term YIMBY before. So absolutely, that generation of 40, 50 years, anti-development generation, spread things out. We were already spread out in LA, prevented us from going vertical, prevented us from getting too dense, and made it so that housing is not available. There's substantially less, and it's not going to meet the needs. And there really is, they're trying to do some things, but there's nothing like truly monumental that's happening that's going to change that anytime soon. You can't change 50 years worth of policy in 5 years.
Yeah.
Houses don't get built fast. But the ADU element is probably the most likely, and we see it in our side of town, to bring in the most. This article, a lot of it, and it stemmed from him, not only the person who wrote it, but using words like ridiculous and, I could own a spaceship before I own a house. I mean, great. Yeah. Sensationalism is wonderful.
Well, can I say, I kind of felt like he was playing both sides of the fence. Maybe this article was more for his professional advancement than really being a good case. Because I can tell you, I'm looking through, you're not alone, and I'm not alone on the viewpoint here. 2,077 comments. Right. And as I read through these comments, most are not pitting him whatsoever.
Absolutely.
And no one's giving him any.
Well, he's successful. We're talking about it, right? So it's completely doable with that kind of income. It's doable with less income. And I just think about a lot of this generation, and it's fun. He wants to move to New Orleans to try to hit that 30% or less mark. I support that, not because I want him to go, but because I get it. If you're not comfortable in a certain way, fine. But other people who are can make it happen at this number, and much less. It's not easy. I mean, I think the assumption of this generation that and this is where I'm getting a little tougher, but I see it so often, of this generation, is that things should come easier. When they talked about that, like hitting a certain milestone of buying a house. Well, look, it doesn't happen at the same age, but everything is pushed forward there in people's lives. Kids are coming later, marriage is coming later, all that's coming later. So to do it in your 30s and or 40s is no different than, their parents who did it in their 30s and 20s. That's normal, but they're not willing to make the sacrifices, man. I mean, look, we talked about this, and in LA, at least I could say, the people were moving to Palmdale and driving an hour and a half both ways every day to buy a house. And in some cases, that became their whole life. In other cases, that was where they started. That's the sacrifice they made, and they sold it, and then they moved to somewhere that gave them a better quality of life. This article, and many people who complain so much, aren't willing to make those sacrifices. This person certainly is not willing to sacrifice, based on the way this article was written, to get a house. It's not just inherently that you will get it. It's not the way it works.
I think the other thing too, there are a lot of things we can shoot up in this article, but the idea that 20% is like the only starting line in getting a home for a down payment is ridiculous. I was telling you, there was a lender talking about how the down payment program, the California Dream down payment program, $300 million gone in 2 weeks. So the state is trying to help out. But he also said, look, there are other programs and other down payments, 3.5% for an FHA, a veteran, a VA loan. I think that's no down, right? There are other ways to get it done. This guy didn't want to mention some of those things.
Right. And he's I believe he said he was a professor. And, there are colleges that give down payment assistance for people transferring in.
Right.
There are special rates if you're part of certain credit unions. I mean, there are incentives out there. Again, if you're seeking them, But if you want to find a way to make it seem like it's unrealistic, yes, you can absolutely do it. And that's how I feel where this guy's coming from.
Yeah. I think the other thing too, and it may not just be a real estate agent, but maybe it's a lender. But as professorial or as educated as this guy is, I don't know if he has good guidance. It seemed he didn't want to have good guidance in this article to make his point. But again, a little disingenuous, I think, taking his case and making that some sort of tiny violin kind of drama.
Yeah. There are people that are highly educated that never buy houses. I've identified that because we have a lot of very highly educated people, in my opinion, in the areas we serve. Yep. And, they can just talk themselves out of it. I think in many cases, it feels like it's too much of a gamble. It's too volatile. And, then you can go for that safer option. But that safer option doesn't exist here in Los Angeles. There is probably going to be a little more of a gamble if you want to get in the door and make it work. So, yeah.
All right. So, again, 2,077 comments and counting. Everybody is about, you're making a lot of money, go find your house. That's totally possible.
Cool, man.
All right, guys. Well, there we go. That was a good one.